The afternoon sun was blazing over my backyard, its reflection dancing across the water, when Officer Martinez stood at the edge of my pool, trying hard not to laugh. Karen, our self-proclaimed HOA queen, was jabbing her finger toward the perfectly blue water like she was presenting a criminal case. "This is unauthorized private use of community property," she screeched. "I demand you arrest him immediately." The officer looked at me, then back at Karen, clearly wondering how his day had spiraled into this absurd scene. I kept my cool, reached into the folder I'd brought out with me, and pulled out my property deed. As I handed it to him, I caught the corners of his mouth twitching. Karen had no idea she was about to become the neighborhood punchline. This ridiculous showdown had actually begun 3 months earlier, when I moved into what I thought was a peaceful suburban dream. The 4-bedroom colonial wasn't the flashiest house on the block, but the private pool out back sealed the deal for me. After years trapped in cramped apartments, I couldn't wait to float on a raft with a cold drink, enjoying a little piece of paradise. The pool had been installed 15 years ago, and during the first walkthrough, that sparkling blue water practically called my name. I signed the papers without a second thought, already picturing barbecues and late-night swims under the stars. The first week felt like I'd stepped into a sitcom. Neighbors waved from their driveways. Kids rode bikes down tree-lined streets. The whole place radiated friendly small-town charm. Then came the knock on my door. Standing there was a woman in her 50s with meticulously styled blonde hair and a clipboard clutched to her chest like a weapon. "Welcome to Willowbrook Estates," she said in a practiced, chipper voice. "I'm Karen Henderson, president for life of our HOA." The way she emphasized president for life should have been my first warning sign. She handed me a thick packet of rules, then her gaze drifted past me through the living room window. When she saw the pool in my backyard, her smile stretched wider, like a cat spotting a canary. "Oh, how wonderful," she exclaimed. "You'll be maintaining the community pool. It's such a blessing to have that common space available to all our residents." I blinked. Sure, I'd misheard her. "I'm sorry, what?" "That's my pool. It came with the house." Karen let out a high, tinkling laugh that somehow made my skin crawl. "Oh dear, there must be some confusion," she cooed. "That pool has always been considered a neighborhood amenity. The previous owners were so generous about sharing it. I'm sure you'll continue that tradition." Before I could even respond, she spun on her heel and walked off, already calling over her shoulder about the next HOA meeting. I stood in the doorway holding that packet, wondering what kind of alternate universe I'd just stepped into. The next few weeks were a crash course in Karen's version of community property. I'd come home from work to find her sprawled on my deck chair, sipping lemonade like she owned the place. One Saturday morning, I was jolted awake by splashing. When I went outside, there she was, doing water aerobics in my pool. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "Just getting my exercise in. The water temperature's perfect today." I stood there speechless as she kept bobbing up and down, completely unfazed by the fact that she was trespassing. Things only escalated from there. Karen started posting flyers around the neighborhood announcing community swim hours in my backyard, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. The first time it happened, I came home to find 8 strangers splashing around in the water, kids cannonballing into the deep end while their parents lounged on my patio furniture. Karen was standing poolside, whistle around her neck like some overzealous camp counselor. "Isn't this wonderful? Building community bonds," she chirped. I took a deep breath, then firmly told everyone they had to leave. This was private property. The neighbors looked uncomfortable and hurried to pack up their things. Karen's face turned crimson. "You're being very selfish," she snapped. "This goes against everything our HOA stands for." The next day, I installed a heavy-duty lock on the gate. By morning, there was a note taped to it in Karen's perfect cursive. "You violate HOA Regulation 7.3 regarding community access to shared amenities. Remove this lock immediately or face fines." I crumpled it and tossed it in the recycling bin. 2 days later, another note appeared, this time laminated, listing pool rules she had personally drafted. No diving in the shallow end pool hours 8:00 a.m., 8:00 p.m. No glass containers. The audacity was almost impressive. She was acting like the director of some neighborhood YMCA. I tried talking to a few neighbors, hoping someone else saw how insane this was. Most just shrugged. That's just how Karen is, they said. She means well. Tom, who lived 2 houses down, leaned in and whispered, "She tried the same thing with my hot tub last year. Said it was a community relaxation station. I had to threaten legal action before she backed off." Apparently, this was Karen's hobby, claiming other people's property as communal space. But my pool seemed to have triggered her ultimate power trip. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I came home early with a pounding headache, desperate for peace. Instead, I found Karen in my backyard again, this time with 3 other women. All of them were wearing matching swimsuits and doing a synchronized swimming routine. She had actually formed an aqua aerobics club. They had a boom box blasting oldies music, and Karen was barking out instructions like a drill sergeant, her voice cutting through the noise. My patience, already hanging by a thread, finally snapped. I stormed outside, planted my feet, and said flatly, "Karen, you need to leave. And don't come back without my permission." She climbed out of the pool with exaggerated dignity, water dripping from her ridiculous floral swim cap. Her voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "You're making a big mistake," she spat. "The HOA board will hear about this." Her retaliation was as swift as it was absurd. 2 days later, I was working from home when I heard a knock at the door. Standing there was Officer Martinez, looking a little sheepish. And behind him, smug, arms folded like a victorious general, stood Karen. She'd actually called 911, claiming I was restricting HOA access to community amenities. "Sir," the officer began carefully, "I need to ask you a few questions about pool access." I could tell he was trying to treat the situation seriously, but the confusion in his eyes said it all. Before I could even speak, Karen pushed past him into my foyer and announced dramatically, "This man is violating our HOA charter. That pool is designated community property, and he's selfishly hoarding it." By then, several neighbors had drifted out onto their lawns, drawn by the commotion. This was better than their afternoon soap operas. I held up a hand to Officer Martinez and said calmly, "Give me 1 second." I walked back to my office and retrieved the folder I'd prepared weeks earlier, because with Karen, you learn to be ready. Inside was the property deed, the original survey, and the title documents. I handed it to the officer and said, "As you can see, the pool is entirely on my property. It was installed in 2009, 3 years before the HOA was even created." Martinez flipped through the papers carefully while Karen leaned over his shoulder, her face draining of color. He cleared his throat and read aloud. "Property boundaries extend to include all structures and improvements, including the 1632 FT in-ground pool and surrounding deck area." Then he looked up at Karen, struggling not to grin. She floundered. But the previous owners always shared the pool. It's been understood for years that it's for the community." "Ma'am," the officer replied, his tone now firm and professional, "intent doesn't override property law. This gentleman owns the pool. If you continue entering without permission, you could be charged with trespassing." A snort of laughter came from the crowd. Someone quickly turned it into a fake cough. Another neighbor muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Told you she was wrong about that pool." Karen's face turned a brilliant shade of crimson. She turned to the neighbors, desperate. "You all use that pool? Tell him!" But suddenly, everyone found the cracks in the pavement fascinating. Not a single soul stepped forward to back her. Officer Martinez handed me my documents with a small smile. "Sir, you're well within your rights to keep this pool private." "Ma'am, I suggest you respect those boundaries." He gave Karen an official trespassing warning, jotted down notes, and then headed back to his cruiser. Karen remained frozen on my lawn, her little HOA empire visibly crumbling. Mrs. Chen from across the street was the first to break the silence. "Karen, we need to talk about your behavior. This has gone too far." Others nodded. Tom added bluntly, "I think it's time we called a special HOA meeting to discuss leadership changes." Karen opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. "This isn't over," she stammered. "I'll review the bylaws. There must be something about implied community usage." But the neighbors were already dispersing, shaking their heads. The special HOA meeting was held the following Wednesday at the community center. I showed up armed with my deed, the police report, and a fresh sense of vindication. The place was packed. Every seat taken, people lining the walls. Karen sat stiffly at the board table, flanked by two uneasy-looking board members. She tried to call the meeting to order with her usual authoritarian tone, but Mrs. Chen immediately cut her off. "We're here to vote on your removal from the board," she said. "Karen, your actions have embarrassed our community and exposed us to legal liability." Karen launched into a rambling speech about preserving community resources and honoring neighborhood traditions, but no one was buying it. When she insisted my pool was meant for the community, I stood up and calmly presented the documents. The original HOA charter, which I'd retrieved from county records, didn't mention my property or any pool. Not even once. The vote was swift. 28 in favor of removal, 2 against. Karen and her loyal sidekick, Deborah. Karen's carefully constructed mask cracked. She slammed her hand on the table and shouted, "You're making a terrible mistake. I've dedicated 7 years to this community." Tom crossed his arms and shot back dryly. "And in those 7 years, you've tried to claim 3 hot tubs, 2 gazebos, and now a pool. It's time for new leadership." Then came the knockout punch. The community lawyer, who'd been invited to observe, calmly explained that Karen's actions had exposed the HOA to a potential lawsuit. She could be held personally liable for harassment and defamation. But the final twist was pure poetic justice. As Karen gathered her things to storm out, the lawyer added, almost casually, "Oh, and Karen? While reviewing the property records, we found that your house, 42 Willow Lane, sits about 15 feet outside the HOA boundary. Technically, you were never eligible to serve on the board." The room erupted into shocked gasps and half-suppressed laughter. Karen's face drained completely as the weight of the truth sank in. She had ruled over an HOA she didn't even legally belong to. Someone in the back muttered, 7 years of her nonsense. And she wasn't even supposed to be here. Karen's humiliation was complete. She fled the room, heels clacking on the linoleum, the door slamming behind her like the end of an era. 2 weeks later, I floated peacefully in my pool, drink in hand, enjoying the quiet. My new security system chimed from the gate. "Welcome to private property. This pool is not community property. Have a nice day." I'd programmed it for my own amusement. A tall privacy fence now shielded the backyard from prying eyes, and the new security cameras offered peace of mind. The final blow came when Karen received the HOA lawyer's bill for the emergency consultation. $5,000, personally charged to her for acting, outside her, already invalid, authority. Tom later told me he saw her at the grocery store. When she spotted him, she abandoned her half-full cart and practically sprinted to her car. Her reign of terror was officially over. She couldn't even show up to complain at meetings anymore because, legally, she wasn't a member. As I floated under the sun, the speaker chimed again as a delivery truck rolled by. "This pool is not community property. No, Karen, it most definitely is not."